Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the D2 Talks. This week my friend Jason is going to interview Tiltpixel, a company based in Houston in the United States of America. If you like what we do on this channel, please hit that subscribe button. We believe in an open conversation about the field of architecture visualization because we think that this benefits everybody who is trying to make it as a 3D artist. We really appreciate your support. Thanks a lot for watching and see you next week.
So guys, I've started the recording. There's no turning back now. So let's get started. Thank you guys for being on the D2 Talks, first of all. And I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself. Each of you take a couple of minutes and, tell a little bit about your background and, how and what you're doing these days.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I'm Ramy Hanna, and I'm a partner at Tiltpixel. We're both partners, and my background is architecture. I studied environmental design at Texas A&M, but it has a strange name, but it's architecture. And I have a focus. I also have a master's of computer art. It's a combination of visual effects, motion graphics, animation. And so really between those two, I landed a job in an architecture firm for 8 years. And that was what I did, doing renderings, animations for architects, in the company we worked at. This was a small architecture studio. And so I worked very closely with the designers and got very intimate with the designs. And that's where I really learned architecture. And from there, I ended up 8 years later, I ended up joining Corey and we started Tiltpixel. And so now, we're busy doing all sorts of projects, doing animations, VR, renderings, real time, all sorts of things right now. So it's pretty exciting and it's been fun. So
yeah, great. Corey?
My name is Corey Harper, and I'm obviously a partner at Tiltpixel. I graduated from Texas A&M class of 98, and I have same as Ramy, I have an undergrad in environmental design, which is basically just an undergrad in architecture. But I kind of did a split where I didn't want to become an architect, but I was still trying to get an undergrad in architecture, and I focused more on a viz track. And A&M didn't have a viz track, so they kind of let us do independent studies, and they were really great at letting us pick classes and kind of blaze our own path. And now, many years later, I think they do have an undergrad in viz. So
oh, really?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, we did a lot of photography, we did a lot of hand drawing, life drawing, architecture, and then that's when I also started tapping into the computer. And so I worked in Houston. My first job was in Houston at an interior design firm. And then I moved up to Boston, worked in a studio in Boston, and then came back in 2009 and started Tiltpixel.
Okay, great. Sounds good. No, of course, the viewer doesn't know this, but we tried to do this video once before and it kind of went in and out. The quality was bad. Whatever. I went in and out. It had some dropping out. But you guys, it was such a good talk that I want to make sure we hit like the topics that we did last time. And I remember one of them was like how you guys met, I think. Didn't we cover that? I also think I showed you my Arkansas hat, but my
yeah, but now I think you burned it.
Yeah. I was well, yeah, but let's talk about that again, like how you guys met each other.
Well, we first met each other back in I want to say it was 2008. So when I was working at an architecture firm doing renderings and animations, I was the only one at that studio doing that. And so my interest was trying to find other people that were doing something similar. And that's where I came across CG Architect. And I found out that they were hosting a conference in 2008. It was called the DMVC conference, and it happened to be in Boston. And so I begged for my superiors to let me go. And they, I had to convince them that it was, worth the money for me to go and learn about 3D. And so they let me go. And it was really cool because finally I got to see that I was not the only person doing this. There were other artists doing renderings and animations in the architecture industry. So that's where we met. And there was a room that had some tables and booths, and Corey happened to be sitting at one of them. And I recognized his Aggie ring because And
they got to take those connections where you can get them,
yeah,
right?
I can network. And so I said, "You went to Texas A&M?" And we had conversations. So we introduced each other then, and I hadn't seen him for Then I went back home, kind of forgot about meeting him, and then it was a couple of years ago. I think you sent me an email.
Yeah, I was working on a project when I came back to Houston, and I had one computer and kind of one little render machine with a few buckets, and I was creating an animation for a project, and I was under a deadline, and I was trying to figure out how can I render a velocity pass, or can I do it in post, or just trying to understand what I wanted to do. And so I went online and I was Googling velocity pass V-Ray, and I came across a blog. And back then, Ramy was really heavily into blogs and tips and tricks and architecture. And so I stumbled across his blog, and I was like, oh, this is great information. It's all on velocity passes. Who would have thought, right? So then I emailed him. Yeah. And I emailed him. I was like, by the way, I'm in Houston too. I'd love to talk shop, because I was by myself at the time. And I just wanted to talk shop with somebody and just, see what's going on. And I emailed him, and I think 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it was
maybe
like,
2
it was
weeks
a couple
later.
weeks. I sat on an email for a little while.
Yeah, he wrote me back, and I said, well, let's do lunch, and so we did. And over the course of that time, we had a couple more lunches, and he was kind of doing some freelance on the side, and I was definitely working on my own. And I think one day I was like, well, why don't we join forces and create something amazing? And it took him a while.
It took me a while. Yeah, he put a little bug in my ear, and the firm I was working at, they made me an associate. I just had twins, and so it was a very comfortable place. And all of a sudden, it was like, do I really want to do that? And so I had to sit and think about it for a little while.
I was like, no, come join me. Come join me. I promise it'll be great. I don't have insurance. I have a bunch of clients, but it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Just come with me.
Yeah, don't worry. It's fine.
Yeah.
Your kids can fend for themselves if it really gets down to it.
Kids are resilient.
So when was that? What year was that when you guys started?
I think I started.
Is that right?
Yeah.
2012?
2012 is when I filed the LLC, and then you came in after that.
Yeah, the next year, I think February 2013.
And did you guys? How many people do you have employed now? Do you have multiple people, right?
Yeah, I think we're at nine
people. Is that including you or
including
nine total? Yeah.
Yeah, we have one guy in Boston, and everybody else is headquarters in Houston.
Oh, you have somebody in Boston. You have like a mini office in Boston.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll call it our Boston office.
Yeah, exactly. You can put it on the website,
Right. You pay the taxes for it. We might as well claim it. Right?
That's right. Absolutely. It's an expense, right? So, no, I'm just interested in that because it's part of the reason that it's interesting to talk to people like you guys because there's this whole level of things that you have to do when you have employees, right? Are you guys like in charge of getting jobs, or do you guys do you guys do everything?
Well, ultimately, we are in charge of the success of the business. I know we were actually talking to someone yesterday, and we're talking about sphere of influences, and he reminded me of this analogy that I gave him that when you work at a company, this is your sphere of influence. And everything inside it is what you can control. If it's outside of your sphere of influence,
I'm not sure they can see your sphere.
If it's outside of your sphere of influence,
is it a circle?
It's a circle. Around like there. Is that circle?
Continue. Sorry.
You can't control it, right? And I think once you become a business owner, you still have that sphere of influence, but it just gets bigger, right? It just grows. So now we're looking at not just doing a rendering or an animation. It's managing people and making sure projects are successful and winning work. And so there's definitely a lot more involved with this industry than just doing what you think a 3D artist does. So it's definitely rewarding and challenging at the same time.
Are you guys doing any more? Sometimes stepping in and doing some of the production work, or not anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we do. We still do all our projects basically, but
Okay.
I'm starting to pull back a little bit more and do some new business development. Running office stuff, and a lot of client management, working with the sales. And Ramy's been focusing a lot on new technology,
Yeah.
doing Unreal, and kind of pushing some of the tech boundaries that we're playing with right now. And
Some
so,
research and development.
but we still jump in and do projects when we need to, because it's fun. We like it.
Yeah, I mean, if you like to do it, that's good. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm still very heavily involved with production. So, I want to make sure that the quality of the renderings look the way it needs to. And, sometimes it's
right.
helping artists with either the technology part of it or the artistic part of it. So it's, we're still very involved with that.
Right. Yeah, I think Corey, the first time I heard about you was from Fabio, and you started out. Did you used to use SketchUp? Is that right?
No.
Maybe it was that Fabio knew about Tiltpixel and he had seen something about SketchUp, and maybe it was from you, Ramy.
Yeah. So we did was it V-Ray for SketchUp? That's what we did.
Yeah. So I want to say it was back in 2013, Chaos Group came to us saying, hey, we're going to release V-Ray for SketchUp. And at the time it didn't exist. And so they said, hey, can you do something with that? And I use SketchUp all the time. But I had never done renderings with it. And so I said, yeah, I think we can do that. And so that's,
okay.
It was a challenge to do that. In the back of my head, I'm thinking we could definitely do this in Max and make it look amazing. But at the time it was very beta and it was very crude. And it's come a long way since then. But at the time it was, just get it to the same level that any standard rendering has in SketchUp. That was challenging. But.
So we did a marketing rendering for them to push out when they had the full release ready to go.
Okay, I see.
And we did that for was it Form Z? It was Form Z. We did another one for Form Z. Yeah.
Form Z was my first 3D program that I ever used.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I mean, they're
in like 1995 or something. I don't know.
Yeah. But they came out with V-Ray for Form Z. Was it last year or a couple of years ago? And so that was another one that was like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, well,
does it still exist?
Yeah, it does.
What does it look like now?
I'm sure it looks different from when I never used it.
I would hope so. I can remember it. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a flash. That's like a blast from the past. I never really got good at it or anything, but I used to play around with it all the time. I always would, it was fun to sit in the computer because, back then we didn't even have our own computers. We had like a computer lab, and I would just go sit in the computer lab for a few hours, like messing around with Form Z. Was there a point in your life, either one of you, whoever wants to respond to that, or both of you, where you said, this is what I want to do, ArcViz in particular?
I think it started back in college when I was in an undergrad, and halfway through architecture, I realized I didn't want to be an architect, and I think I already said that. But I met this guy Steve Parker at A&M, and he was going through the graduate program at A&M, the Viz Lab, and he showed me 3D programs like Max 2 and Maya 1 and things that they were learning and things that they were doing with these programs. And for me, it opened my mind, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. It's all 3D, and yet you can start building architecture with it. And at some point I was thinking, well, if I don't want to be an architect, but I still love design, I love architecture, can I blend these two together? Because for me, 3D was something I definitely wanted to pursue. So I started learning Max. I started learning everything I could possibly learn. And I would go to Barnes & Noble, and I'd sit and I'd drink a lot of coffee, and I'd read a lot of books. And I was just trying to figure out, I didn't even know what softwares I should be focusing on because I didn't have a job yet. But I was just learning and learning and learning. And then once I graduated, I got my first job with a company in Houston called PDR, and they were an interior design company, and they were looking for somebody to do 3D. And at the time it was very new. They were very forward thinking because people weren't hiring 3D artists at the time. architects and designers yet. And so they were always trying to figure out, can they bring in 3D to sell their vision and sell their products? And can they actually make this, something that helps them win projects, sell their designs? And so for me, I was like, that opportunity, I was like right there. I was like, if I had this opportunity, I think I can make this my career if I work really, really hard. And then from there, I got an opportunity to move up to Boston and work with great artists like Lon Groves and Rodrigo Lopez and Carlos, and worked in a studio environment. I wasn't a lone guy anymore, but I was learning from them. We were learning together. It was very collaborative, and we were pushing boundaries that nobody had ever done back then. And so after that, I had the opportunity to start Tiltpixel with Ramy, and we capitalized on that and made Tiltpixel what it is today.
Did you have a time, Ramy, when you said, wait, did you say you studied architecture or you studied environmental design? It was in the architecture department.
So, right. I mean, I did study architecture, but if I was back in grade school, if you were to say, hey, you want to do, arch viz, you want to do architecture, that was definitely not a thing in my mind. And as a child growing up, I always wanted to be a cartoonist. I always wanted to draw. I loved movies.
Okay.
I loved film, and so that's what I thought I wanted to do. When I got to Texas A&M, they had a Viz program, which had a program that got people into that track where it was film and animation, but it was only a graduate program. And so I said, for the time being, it just happened to be in the architecture department. And so I said, for the time being, I can study architecture. Sure, why not? But during those 4 years at A&M, I think that's when I fell in love with architecture. And I realized I really like this. This is really cool. Now, I still had there was still that part of me that wanted to do animation and film, that kind of aspect. But I loved architecture. And so I thought, well, how can I combine the two? And that was an interesting thing because at the time they didn't have an undergrad track for that. And so I knew I liked architecture, but I went on to grad school and thinking I still wanted to do animation. And I went to Vienna College of Art and Design, and I took a 2D animation class. This was traditional animation, hand drawing with pencil. And it was taught by this professor who used to work for Disney. And, we started drawing these characters and animating them. And I thought, I'm pretty good at this. But what I realized is I hate doing this. It is a pain in the butt to do it because you're literally drawing the same thing over and over again. I thought this is tedious.
And then are you doing like the thing where you have to like lift up the sheet? Was it literally like with cells? Oh my God. Yeah. That's crazy.
A sack of flour, and it looked good, but it was driving me crazy. And so then I went to the computer and said, I wonder if I can animate on the computer. And it was just like, click here, move the ball, click here. And I thought, this is much easier. Let's do this. And so it was then that I realized that I did not want to do animation. I really do like architecture and having it, the built environment into 3D. That was really what was more, the visual effects part of it was much more interesting to me. So that's really when I kind of decided I want to lean more towards just architecture. I loved architecture. I got a job at an architecture firm, but I knew I didn't want to be an architect because, I'd see these architects doing drawings of, toilet partitions and stamping drawings. And I said, I don't want that responsibility. Don't want it. That's going to drive me crazy. So,
man, I'm with you on that one.
I mean, they pushed me to get licensed, and I was close to. I started testing, and then I decided, what? I like architecture, but I don't want to be an architect. So that's kind of when it was a fork in the road where I decided, I want to do ArchViz, I want to do renderings, and that's really a passion. So that's kind of when I was working. It's interesting because working in the architecture environment or architecture studio, that's when I realized I didn't want to become an architect.
Well, that's kind of when you usually find out.
Yeah,
you're doing the job. You're like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
I mean, I that kind of happened to me. I didn't want to do the. I don't really like the management part of it personally. Like I like working on the projects, but then like the whole management that would come into it when you're like the project manager. Oh God, that was horrible. I just didn't like that. But I got my license.
You did, yeah.
I'm licensed, yeah. I got it right before I came to Europe, and I never needed it again. So
all that hard work paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. But I am a licensed architect. Okay. So I've got that, I can say that, but that's pretty much it.
It's an accomplishment. People don't realize it's like, it's like becoming a doctor. You got to take all these
Yeah.
tests. It's
Education.
It's a lot. So
Yeah.
it's quite a feet. But yeah, I mean, as far as architecture, there's a huge aspect to creating a building. There's project management, there's the code involved. And I really, I loved architecture so much that I didn't want to get away from the design. So I always gravitated towards working with the designers and the concept of the way the building looked. And to me, honestly, that's the fun part of architecture, right? So
yeah, I agree.
It's cool that we get to do that every day with what we do. So yeah.
And if you work with a good client where you can actually, have you guys ever, that's actually a good question. Have you guys ever had the opportunity to work with an architect where they were using your input or wanted your input on the design of the building in terms of, working with you as a consultant on 3D?
Yeah. We get that all the time where it's,
really?
They'll have a concept in mind, but a lot of times the architect is short on time or talent or staff, and they say, hey, can you come up with a design? We need this presentation, and we'll give them 3 design options of the building from the exterior, and it's really successful because not only are we coming up with the idea, it's they're using it for their marketing, but we can design it in-house, and so it's fun for us to come up with the concept as well. So
we get to design more interiors than necessarily exteriors. Architects like to design the shell and code involved and this and that, but we've done a couple exteriors where we've given some options, but interiors are usually it's
more typical.
Yeah, more typical, where the developer comes in and says, I need something to show to the bank or to a tenant or a possible pitch, and I don't have designs yet, but make it look like a Facebook techie type of company. Go for it. And then we design up a bunch of things and send it back, and so we've done several projects like that.
And honestly, those projects tend to be our better marketing renderings. There are times when we'll work with an interior designer and they don't quite see how it looks visually, and then we render it out and they say, well, let's tweak this fabric or that. I think because we understand the technology and we understand photography and lighting, and there's so many aspects to materiality and lighting that it's important to understand that materials affect the way a room is lit, and if you don't put those together, there's this kind of disconnect. Whereas we know our library, and we have this eye where we can put things together. And a lot of times when we design it, some of those become our more successful projects.
Yeah, I'm actually going to come back to that. I have a question for you about what you just said. But before I ask that, I would like to ask, do you guys have like a scheme with your pricing that deals with the fact that you're doing a lot of design? If you have to do design, do you have a separate like line item for that or something? Or when you get an image and the architect says, well, it needs to look like this, is that just part of your would you consider that just part of your regular job of doing the image?
I mean, design is usually an added scope to what we do. A lot of times we assume that a project is set in stone and we'll run with it. But then sometimes if a designer starts going back and forth on design, sometimes we have to say, wait a minute, we're also helping you design. This is more design development than really just fleshing your concept out. And so, we consider that, it's a service that we provide. We're adding service to a designer who's looking at something and saying, hey, this isn't quite the design I thought it was, and they're designing on top of our concept, and it's going back and forth. And so sometimes it's a little different process than just, taking something that we're given and fleshing it out. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess my real question is, in the end, because I think that, it happens a lot that people who are doing the interior visualization are also expected by architects that they'll just design it too, which is actually 2 separate things. And if you're not careful, like if you're starting out or something and you're not careful, you're not going to charge enough for that, because the reality is it's actually quite a job, And I was just wondering if you guys have that kind of like agreement to do that with people.
We charge for, the amount of effort is involved. And if you get a model and it's textured and it's ready to go, then, obviously that's a lesser price than if you have to design something, or if it's a a massive project. It really just determined the effort involved, and then we price it accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't want to get into pricing. I know that's not what we're talking about. I just wanted to say, because I think it's important for people who are, have not worked for a long time into business and who are maybe listening, that it's an interesting topic that they should pay attention to. About you charge for the amount of work it's going to take you. Super important. It seems simple, but a lot of people will do more than they'll do more work than they should.
Right.
I don't mean that in a way that you shouldn't work hard. I just mean that you can be taken advantage of sometimes.
Right. You can be set at a fixed price and then end up not understanding the full scope, and then end up doing a lot more work still under that fixed price umbrella.
Exactly.
You need to have a caveat in there that says, after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of revisions or a certain amount of effort or whatever, then it goes into either maybe an hourly thing or a change order. But I mean, you have to lay out your terms pretty much right out front so everybody knows and they're all on the same page, because no one wants to be taken advantage of. The client on the other side doesn't want to be taken advantage of either, where if you don't list out your terms, the next thing you know, they're getting a bill for 10 times the amount you originally said because, you kept going and kept going and kept going. You definitely have to have everything, your terms, everything on the table up front. And if it requires a change order, then it's a change order. Most people aren't afraid to pay change orders because they know it's out of scope. But as long as you have those terms up front, I think you'll be okay and covered.
Yeah.
And then from the production side, it's also important to know what are we delivering, because for an artist, it's real easy for artists to get hung up on all the little details. If we're doing a kitchen, let's look at the grout and let's make sure that's right. And we always say, we have to work smarter, not harder. And so at the end of the day, we're creating an image. If it's a still rendering, it's a flat 2D image. What in that space is going to tell that story and make it look the way it needs to? And so it's more thinking about stepping back and saying, okay, how can we make this image look the way it needs to without having to jump through all of the, the technical hoops that we need to. And in the end, it will look as good. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like that it just gets down to communication again, like that the most important thing you can do is have a good communication with your client. And then on both sides, everybody's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Maybe not happy, but they'll understand. Right. But Ramy, I actually wanted to get back on something that you said before about how materials will affect, how the room is lit and how it looks. And this is something I think that comes up a lot of times. I've seen it in workshops and different things. And it's very often these days that people will suggest to not send like clay renders to people. And because a clay render doesn't really give you all the information, right? So I want to ask you, do you guys do that? Do you send clay renders? Do you send fully textured stuff? It's a thing that comes up to me all the time now.
Really? No, we send clay renders all the time, but it's mostly for camera selections.
View selections, so
It's
right.
At that point, and then we try to make it very clear to the client. This is because we pull the materials off, and sometimes they're not even lit. It's just it's a very crude clay rendering, but this way it helps them focus just on the camera view, and we'll tell them at this point, these are a few camera options you can select from, and that way their attention isn't diverted to, oh, why are we using this light, or why is it, why is this material red, not blue, or that type of thing. So
right,
but so it's a very specific purpose.
But do they really focus on it? I mean, I've had this problem. I know this problem, like getting them to focus on things.
It is challenging, but I think part of it's communication, and when we say, these are the 3 stages that we go through, the first one's camera selection, then we have a draft, finished proof, then they'll kind of know where in the process that they're at. And so we'll tell them, before we move on to furniture and materials, we need to select the camera view. So here's some options. And sometimes we don't give them options. Sometimes we say, here's the view, let us know what you think. And so it just depends on the project, the client,
right?
What we're looking at. So it's, but yeah, we find that if we can strip away the different options, it helps them focus a little better on.
No, that's good if it works for you guys. And this is obviously if you're working with returning clients, then it's easier because they know how you guys do it, and
Right.
it becomes easier. How much of the work you guys do you think is for returning clients? Is it a lot?
We have
Quite a few.
yeah, we have a lot of existing long-term clients that we
Yeah.
just call up, and we have a great working relationship with them, and they already know. And half the time they don't even ask for pricing right up the front because
Right.
it's been established for so long that
Yeah.
they know how much we charge, and then we kind of know what they want and
Yeah.
what they need. So it's been a good working relationship in that front.
Yeah, that's great. And what do you guys think makes your company different than other companies? Like what's a reason that somebody would come to you guys?
Well, there's several reasons, but I mean, the primary reason is that
Let's hear them.
I mean, the primary reason I think as artists, we've been in this industry for a long time. We understand not only what the client is needing, but we understand how to sell their products as well as possible. And so we understand architecture, but we also understand photography and lighting. I mean, I did photography for architects for a while, and it's one thing to be able to do a rendering and reproduce it, but to come to a client and say, well, wouldn't it be better if we try to focus on this aspect? I understand you have this building. These are the amenities in your building. Here's how we can market it and sell it. Did you think about showing some spaces in this area? So some of it's also just, being proactive and thinking about the project from the client's perspective. How do we sell their product as best as possible? So that, that's a big part of it versus, other studios that are just going to produce a rendering that the client says, I want a rendering from here and here are the drawings, do it. And, there's that aspect. So, I think being able to think about the project from the same perspective as the client is very important.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the difference between providing a service and doing a job.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys are providing a service, so.
Yeah, and a lot of times we're leading clients along where the clients will trust us, and some of them, they're longstanding relationships that we've had, and they'll say, well, what do you guys think we should do for this project? And so it's nice because it gives us not only the freedom to make creative decisions, but they can also trust us with decisions that help them market their building or their space as well as possible. So
yeah. Okay, I'm going to jump back again and ask a question that I probably should have asked at the beginning, but where does the name Tiltpixel come from?
$1 million question.
That's a funny question because there's two answers I like to give. One, if you think about it, tilt shift lens, architectural photography, pixel, computers, digital, the two together, kind of architectural viz, right?
Yeah.
That's how it really happened. That's not even close to how it happened.
This was made up like after as a description.
That was made up after.
Story A.
The truth is when I was trying to come up with a name, obviously key to a company is a website, and so I am on GoDaddy, Google, searching names I like, names I think are cool. And probably some GoDaddy AI combination came up with various terms that I was searching and came up with Tiltpixel. And there was like a bunch of them at the bottom of the screen. And I'm sitting here just racking my brain over hundreds and hundreds of names. And I look down and I'm like, Tiltpixel. I kind of like that. I sat on it for a couple of weeks. And finally I'm like, I asked around. I was like, my friends, what do you think of this name? What do you think of this name? And they're like, yeah, I kind of like it. It's kind of cool. So I was like, done. And I jumped on it. I took the website, and the rest is.
Okay, great. But that's a perfect story. That's exactly what I wanted. I wanted both stories,
Yeah, right.
What happened and what you tell people. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's marketing and reality.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. But isn't that like, I think this happens a lot of times with, even with architectural projects.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, all the time.
It's done, and they're like, and then what we were trying to do. Yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah. You just maximize the rentable floor space in that thing. Come on, don't even start talking about it.
Yeah, no, we had this big philosophical idea behind the design. You just want to make it fit.
That's great though. No, I like it. I really like it. So there's sometimes an issue in the field of ArcViz or in any kind of production environment where, you end up having to like work like insane hours to do something. Is this a problem that you guys have sometimes, or have you figured out a way to like manage it? And the reality is that those kind of things can sometimes lead to you or your staff to, have problems coping with all that stuff.
Burnout.
You guys manage that somehow?
I think it is about managing that effort and understanding kind of what your capabilities are as a company and what your capabilities are as employees. And then if we have projects that require like late nights or all-nighters, usually we give like the next day off, or we'll give a day off that week, depending on if the project's still going on, because, we want people to go home, sleep, take a shower, get rested, because there's times where working all night is not productive at all. Yeah. And I think part of the problem is I remember days where I was working and I literally brought a sleeping bag and I slept under the desk. And it was my first animation. It took 2 weeks to get it done. And thank God I was single at the time, because I was sleeping under my desk and probably, but you end up.
That's how you learn.
Yeah, I mean, there are late nights in this industry, but you have to manage it, and you have to manage that effort. Something that always sticks with me is that back in studio, when I was at A&M, we were building physical models out of balsa wood and foam core boards, and we were pulling all-nighters just to get these projects done, and we're cutting ourselves with X-Acto blades, and it was crazy.
Good old days.
The good old days, right? But then you had to present those ideas. And usually you presented them when you were up for 24, 48 hours, and you're exhausted and you're not thinking straight. So this was always a great way to learn about constructive criticism from your instructors. So I remember this one time I presented my project, and they got it. They kind of got it, I guess, but, gave me some constructive criticism, some ideas, and then I was done. Fine. And then my friend gets up and he presents his idea, and they didn't get it. I mean, they just ripped it apart. And to the point where the poor guy started tearing up and started crying a little bit. And at some point he said something to the effect of like, but I stayed up all night. And the instructor said, well, you stayed up all night on a bad idea. And for me, it was like, that stuck with me forever. And there are times when you stay up all night and you're staying up all night for the wrong reasons too. You're not even, maybe you're focused on the wrong thing, and then the next morning you realize I wasted a lot of time. So you have to be cognizant of how much time you're putting into something, and sometimes it's best just to put it down, step away, go home, sleep, and come back the next day fresh. And you might actually work faster, smarter, work differently on that effort. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And most of the time it is, approaching the problem with the wrong approach. And so you're spinning your wheels for the wrong reasons. And so sometimes stepping back and saying, what is the best way to achieve this? Maybe I'm not doing it quite right. Let me ask another artist to see if they have any ideas. And sometimes, they may have the solution. And, as a young artist, I remember wasting so many hours trying to do something and only to find out that I did it the wrong way. There was probably an easier way to do it. So
yeah.
But that part of that's learning, but at the same time too, for us, with our projects, we also try to manage the time and say, we think it's going to take, X amount of hours to complete an animation of this magnitude. Let's see what we can do with the time and so I think because of the experience, we're pretty aware of the time and the effort. And sometimes we'll get red flags from clients that say, well, hey, we need this animation next week. It's like, well, you could do that, but one, it probably won't look the way you're thinking it will look. Two, it'll probably be wrong. And even if the quality is good, it won't be, there are design aspects that are not quite fleshed out. So,
and we'll all be dead. Is that what you want? We'll all be dead.
Right. Our artists are going to be mad at us, right? So there are lots of things that, so it's important to understand, how long things take. And I think communicating that to clients, part of that is just teaching them the process as well, right?
Yeah, setting realistic deadlines with the client is also key, right? Because sure, you can probably get it done in 3 days, but that's if everybody's up all night working and it's not beneficial to anybody. But in reality, they probably are okay if it took 5 business days, 6 business days. You know, we've gotten a lot of false deadlines before too. I mean, much like a lot of studios, I'm sure, but just set that realistic expectation with the schedule and then try to stick with it.
Oh, you mean like they're giving you a deadline that's like 2 weeks before they're actually needed or
Yeah,
something?
Right.
Or
Yeah, fake deadline. You know, for us, you know, if you don't think it's fake, you think it's real. You're pushing, you're killing yourself to get it done, and then, you know, they have some wiggle room. So
when you find out because they're like, well, we need it by this day, and they're still designing, and so that process pushed. By the time we get it to actually get it done, they're like, oh, well, you can actually have another week. You know, you're like, well, why didn't we?
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
That's so nice of you. Thanks. We can have another week. Yeah, no, I felt that before too. Because you guys have staff, what is something that you look for when you're hiring someone?
It's a good question. I think it's not one particular aspect. I think obviously some artistic talent, and probably that may be the primary thing, but you could have someone who's, you know, an incredibly talented artist, but, you know, if they're not a good problem solver, you know, you're always constantly telling them, well, you know, we need to do it like this and that. So you don't want to micromanage an artist. You want someone that can think for themselves. And so, you know, someone who's a talented artist, but also we want problem solvers that can approach a problem that they've never seen before and kind of think it through. That's really beneficial. I mean, it's, you know, you really can't put a price on that. And so I think that's a big thing that we look for. And at one point I was debating between, you know, the artistic or the technical. And I think honestly, what I found is it's much easier to teach the technical to a new artist versus the artistic. The other problem is if someone knows a software, that software is going to change. And so it's not going to be the same software. And so they have to be able to adapt to new technologies, new software. You know, if an artist, all they know is Max, how are they going to be able to adapt to Unreal? And so we want artists that can, again, problem solve and think for themselves, but to have that core foundation of art and photography and composition, I think that's key. And so the software to me is not as important. Of course, you know, it does help if you know, you need to know, I mean, you need to know Max and V-Ray, because you know, we can teach it to you, but, you know, that's something you can learn on your own. It's in some aspects, you know, the foundations and the core of the software, that's something that's easy to pick up. And now with the internet, there's so many resources that you can learn from. So that's part of it, but really be able to problem solve, I think that's key for us.
Yeah. And like the issue you said about, you know, it's hard to teach someone the artistic side of it. And that's absolutely true. I think it's the same. I mean, I feel the same way that, the technical stuff is sometimes a little bit easier to learn because it's kind of follows this, you know, a step you can follow along and see how things work. But the artistic side is more complicated. It can be taught, but it's not as straightforward.
It can be taught, and there are aspects that we do teach. You know, it's, you know, as far as like photography, composition, lighting. I mean, those are things that we can teach. There are a lot of things that are just, to some people, are just innate as artists that are, you know, they can see. Some people have a better eye, and so that's you know, things that you can't be taught. So yeah, that's very true.
Corey, you have anything to say about that?
I don't have to say about that.
You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But like, is there something that you would look for, or like that anything different than that, or?
You know, from a business side, when we're looking to hire, you know, it depends on where we are at the state of the company. You know, in the beginning of when we started Tiltpixel and we were working out of our house and, you know, very grassroots, and we were looking for people, just, can you push a button?
Can you breathe?
Do you know Max? You know, we have a deadline.
You're hired.
You know, you're hired.
Have you ever used a computer?
Right. You alive. That's first.
Yeah.
And then as you start to grow and you get bigger, you start to look at, you know, do we need senior artists, or do we need sales or marketing? You know, how do we go about that? And as we grew, we decided we were going to focus on kind of up and coming artists, you know, kids out of school, who kind of knew Max and V-Ray, but didn't necessarily know architecture per se, kind of an understanding of it. But we figured, we can probably teach you how to read plans or sections or elevations. But since you have an artistic side and Max and V-Ray, we started hiring these kids who were very ambitious and eager to learn. And so we developed over the course of several years a handful of young graduates that came in. And then as you get bigger, you start to look at, how do we expand and how do we grow? What do we need as staff? So I'm always looking at it from the perspective of where are we now as a business and where are we going in the future? And how do we be proactive instead of reactive in hiring? You know what I mean? You don't want to get stuck with a massive Unreal project and no one knows how to use Unreal, and then you have to run and hire a bunch of people. But it's about being, proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Were these people these students that were coming out of school, were they coming out of an architecture background?
No, mostly art.
They were, yeah,
okay.
they were,
Because you said something about reading plans and stuff, and I just was hoping
most
that
of
they
them
could
are
do
not
that if they came out of architecture school. Yeah.
I mean, so we talked about the artistic side and the software, but a lot of the new artists that are coming into our studio do have a software foundation. So it's much easier, I think, to teach the architecture part of it than it is to teach the technical part of it. I think a big part of what we do is in 3D, and so it's important that that's something they're passionate about. Mm-hmm. The architecture, that's important too. But the principles of the process apply to not only architecture, it applies to anything in 3D. And so as long as they understand the technical part of it, they can apply that to anything. I think so. I found it's easier to teach them the architecture portion of it.
Yeah. And then the kids that we interviewed from straight up, architecture school, they knew architecture great, but they were learning all completely different software. And so like they were using a different modeling engine and a completely different rendering engine. And so that would just take too long to get up to speed. So
I see. Yeah. The problem. Yeah. That's interesting. So your art school people had been playing around with like animation and stuff like that, perhaps in Max or Yeah.
And then the architecture schools that we go to we'll do like a career day at architecture schools. They're, like Corey said, they're teaching the wrong software, and they may know architecture, but it makes us wonder why are the schools not on board with what the industry is doing. And so I think there's a disconnect. And a lot of times they're using a very romantic software. They may be using Rhino or Grasshopper, but it's like, okay, let's come back to the fundamentals of doing visualization. Right now, it's, the industry standard is Max and V-Ray, and it's amazing to me how many students don't even know what they are or have used them at all. So it is interesting, I think. Yeah.
3ds Max, what's that? I personally use Cinema 4D.
Do you really?
I use Rhino.
There you go.
But but it's possible to do. So as people who are watching these videos, there are people out there who are maybe young and coming up in the industry. Are there any tips that you could give such people about what they should focus on and what they should do in order to break in and get a job somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's the same thing I said last time. It's all about networking. Don't burn bridges, first off and foremost. That is key. And then network. And I think one of the best things we did last year, now that's 2019, but we took our employees, we made a very conscious decision to take our employees to different conferences throughout the year. Some of them were gaming conferences. Others were the Unreal conference that they put on. And then we took 2 employees to D2. And for them, no, but for them, it was mind blowing because, they sit and they see tutorials, they see blogs, they see Instagram posts, they see all this stuff that gets put out there, but they never really had a chance to meet other artists. You know, they have their struggles in the studio and we talk about them, but then when they go out to conferences and they network and they meet other artists and they see that other people are, oh, they have the same problems as I have, or they're doing the same kind of deliverables as I am, but they've actually thought about doing it in a different way or going in this direction. And it really opened their mind to how other people are working, and they don't feel like they're on an island anymore. You know, they're connected and they know these people now, these people now in the industry. And so when they see articles come out by these other individuals, they're like, oh, I remember that guy. And, you know, and he was really smart and really talented. And I'm going to actually read this tutorial and understand it better, you know? So for them, going to these conferences, I think was crucial. And D2, I think you guys are doing an amazing job there.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I would say at D2, if you're an individual walking around and you see all these companies, you know, they hang out together, they drink together, there's 4 or 5 of them, and they usually talk together. You know, don't be afraid to walk up and introduce yourself and just walk up and drink a beer with them or something like that. Because, you know, the last D2, I think you had mentioned to this one artist to come talk to me, and it was right at the end. I mean, we were, everybody was leaving. And she came up and she said, you know, Jason told me to talk with you. And we got to talking, and it was, as people were leaving, she's, you know, mentioned that it could be somewhat intimidating to break into some of these bigger groups. And I knew after talking with her, she was interested in looking for, you know, a possible different job or career in the art viz industry. And so I was like, well, hold on, I'm going to introduce you to everybody I know real quick. And, you know, I introduced the D-Box.
Which is a nice lineup, actually, who you could
I introduced D-Box, I introduced the Kilograph and a couple other people, and come to find out she got a job with Kilograph, which was great. So that just proves that networking and talking with people can be really beneficial down the road.
Yeah. In some ways, going out and meeting people it leaves a much more lasting impression than, you know, to just hand somebody or to send somebody your work or what you did, your name, whatever. To meet them in person and talk to them, because a lot of what ends up happening anyway is what's the chemistry between people.
Yeah.
And I would say very quickly after you meet someone if you think they would be someone you could work with or not.
Yeah,
just from the personality.
If people see me in D2, just come up and talk to me. I'm an open book, honestly. You know, part of networking, it also goes with clients, right? You know, keep networking with clients and keep in touch with people, because in 09 and 08, 09, when the economy was a downturn, you know, I was by myself trying to find work and trying to do renderings, but, you know, I had a list of clients that I had kept in touch with, and I would just email them constantly just to say, hey guys, I'm still here. Just wanted to say hi, you know, just reminding them I'm around. And you're tapping into that network. So there's the artist network and then there's the client network. And it really does come down to that social networking, because that's what's going to get you moving forward in both aspects.
It's the people, you know, and if I hadn't gone to Boston for the Viz conference in 2008, we wouldn't be working together today. So
exactly,
you know,
it's amazing. But Ramy, do you have something to add to that? Like, aside from the networking part of it, about, you know, what people might do to prepare themselves?
I remember when I had started as an artist, and I wish I had picked up on this sooner, but I remember getting onto CG Architect and the forums and just posting things or looking for, if I couldn't figure something out, I'd go to these Viz forums to find a solution. It took me way too long to connect the dots and realize that, you know, the people on these forums are the same people at these events. And it really is, you know, a community, and it's in an industry where it's the same people, you know, the same usual suspects. And so, you know, make the connections between the, you know, the people that know the information on these websites and the people at the events. But there's so much more information on the internet now than there used to be. And so we were very limited with how much information was on the internet regarding this 3D rendering, animation. There's a lot of it, and it's changing a lot these days too. So I think for a young artist, it's very important to stay connected to that, constantly be interested in learning, see what's on there. Social media has really changed that. I mean, I remember back in 2005, there hardly was any social media. There was Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. They were used, but it's not like they are today. So
Yeah.
So much more information out there. So but it's also a lot more information to get inspired by and learn. So yeah, go to those places and learn. I mean, there's a lot of information out there.
So, guys, I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this interview. And I hope to see you guys again at the D2 or somewhere in Europe, maybe in 2019.
Yeah.
That would be great. And you guys have a great day. And this is Jason signing off for the D2 Talks. We'll see you for the next one.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.